coming into Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Gligar got a few nerfs that are actually pretty substantial and caused it to drop below RU for the first time since Generation 5. Of course, it lost Defog, which is some useful utility, but more importantly, it lost Roost, meaning Gligar effectively has no recovery unless it wants to run Rest, which is very suboptimal. And yet, since falling to NU, it has established itself as, at worst, maybe the third best Pokemon in the tier, and arguably the best. So today, I'm going to talk about why Gligar is regarded so highly. This is a video based on, of course, a metagame that's expiring as of the day this video is going to go out. But I thought it'd be a fun topic to cover anyway, because I have talked on and off about why Gligar is so good. So since I need something to record for, I had no work for the day. So I won't be able to get to tier shifts until much later. I wanted to talk about this. Of course, you've been enjoying this kind of content. Go subscribe if you're not already subscribed. We are going to hit 6K subscribers so soon. And of course, end of the year goal for next year is 10K. So help a brother out, man. So, I'm talking about Gligar. The first point, of course, needs to be, why is it still so good? Of course, it's below RU now. It's NU, so in a way it got worse. It was UU in Gen 5, I believe RU or UU in Gen 6, and UU by the end of Gen 7. And it doesn't exist, of course, in Gen 8. So it fell to NU, so like, it's worse, but why is it still so dang good? Well, there are a few reasons for that. One, it didn't just get nerfed. Obviously. It got some buffs. The biggest buff is Spikes. I had Rocks and they just have a sample set. But Spikes is the biggest buff. This just means that you can run it alongside other Stealth Rock sitters like Copperajah or Chansey. And Gligar still functions perfectly fine on those teams. You cover up a lot of their weaknesses, of course. The most profound one for both of those mentions is going to be a weakness to fighting types. Gligar is an incredible switch into such attacks. Makes it a really nice, not only defensive core, but hazard stacking core. So that's great. It also retained a couple of the very useful moves that you want on a defensively minded utility Pokemon. You still have Knockoff. Of course, that's great synergistically with Spikes, especially in a generation with heavy-duty boots. Your Spiker being able to get rid of boots from Pokemon and support the entire identity of the team wearing down the opposing threats, that is incredible. Having that built in is just immaculate. And of course, keeping Toxic as well. Similarly immaculate. Toxic does not have super high distribution, even with a few Pokemon getting it in the DLC 1 release. And some Pokemon just getting it back. Gligar being one of those mons to not lose access to Toxic is very, very nice. You look at this mon's attacking stat, this is not good. 186 is simply put bad. Even though you're spamming off Stab Earthquake, it's just not very strong Pokemon. As a result, being able to get that passive damage off on some common switch-ins that you may have, like, say, Palisand, for example, if they try to contest you, or even just throw off Toxic against a threat like, say, maybe Decidueye if it hard switches into you, thinking it can exploit you, or limiting the threat of Florgus, or Dunsparce. That is also very, very useful. Toxic also is really good because it can force Terastallizing. You know, we can go right back to those mentions of Dunsparce and Florgus. You may be able to force one of those two to go for their Terra Poison versus you immediately, which is already not very good because you have EQ anyway, but if you could force early Terastallizing, that does potentially give your team a little bit of an edge. And then just another general note, what else has Gligar gotten access to this gen that has made it so good? This little button right here, Terra type, baby. Gligar, of course, is an incredible user of it. Terra Water on a mon like this, particularly given what we've talked about with NU, how we don't have a lot of great bulky water type options. There you go, you can get one out of nowhere. And Terra Water is so good on Gligar because what are the most common ways to try and do damage to it in NU? Well, water type moves and even ice type moves. Those are probably going to be the two biggest threats of damage versus this. You talk about common coverage, there's not really a lot of Pokemon running that kind of specific coverage. However, you want to look at Toxicroak, for example. Ice Punch Croak is just about mandatory on it right now, in large part for Gligar. And if you need to flip the script on that boy and turn into a water type out of nowhere, you can still retain your very, very, very favorable matchup against Toxicroak and put it down. So those are a few things that keep Toxicroak going. Of course, No, Toxicroak. Those are a few things that keep Gligar going, but of course it's not so straightforward. There's multiple other reasons too that it's so good. Typing's gonna be a big one. Ground Flying, we already know that's broken. Look at Gliscor. Look at Lando T. An incredible defensive typing on an incredible utility moveset. Oh, combine those two, give it all that bulk. Very, very nice. But why don't we contextualize this into the metagame as well real quick? What are Pokemon that Gligar is able to put a stop to? And I'm not even going to have to talk about Terra here because it's just not needed. What are a whole bunch of Pokemon that you are at least checking, right? Hariyama, checked. Heracross, checked. Jolteon, one of the most obnoxious, obscene, stupid, poo-poo pee-pee Pokemon of the tier, checked. Sandslash, and we can talk about that through the lens of Sand teams entirely, checked. Scyther even, checked. Paldean Blaze Tauros, checked. Croak, checked. These are all Pokemon that are like A- or higher on the VR, other than the Sand stuff, but we kind of acknowledge Sand is still really good and really worth checking. The Mon puts in so much work in one slot, and really is super easy to justify too, because when you talk about Flying type, you always want to have a Mon that can be immune to EQs on your team, because EQ is very common attack, very strong. Stab EQ is kind of just guaranteed to be seen on almost every team. Not every team, but a lot of teams are going to have a stab EQ user. You want to have a way to blank that, especially when it's an offensive ground type, which NU doesn't have a ton of, but you still have some strong ones that may want to throw off EQs. And of course, being a ground type that isn't weak to grass, very, very useful in a tier with Rotom, Mo, with his Hisui Electrode. Gligar can actually pivot into those Mons, and even if it's getting Leaf Stormed, yeah, it's going to take a ton, but at least, you know, you can absorb it decently well. And with Jolteon, and my Immaculate EVing, even if that Mon boosts to +1, goes for its, you know, Terra Blast Fairy, or just Terra Ghost Shadow Ball, you are avoiding a 2-hit KO, and you're able to take a very favorable trade. EQ from Gligar, I believe, actually does 2-shot Jolteon, or at least it's a damage roll to 2-shot. I think about like 50-50 odds. I'm getting a little bit of chip on Jolteon. It's not like that's impossible. It's not necessarily the easiest thing either, because Jolt's not a Mon known for taking random chip, but it is a Mon that you can find taking a little bit of that chip. Sometimes Jolteon wants to pivot in and block a Volt Switch. Maybe you get Leaf Stormed, or maybe your own Jolteon Shadow Balls it, for example. There are instances where you could find that chip coming through. Gligar able to make the most of that by following up with a nice little 2-tap from its Earthquake. But we mentioned all this versatility, I haven't really shown it yet, right? So let's go back to the most fundamental Gligar set. I believe this to be the closest to standard Gligar that you can talk about right here. Stealth Rock, Earthquake, Knockoff, U-Turn. You see a lot more U-Turn nowadays on Gligar, and Knockoff is just kind of common on every team nowadays, because a lot of NU is based around Hazard stack, since our Hazard control is so cringe. You want Knockoff so that when you have your own Spiker in the back, you're getting that nice Hazard damage to actually come through and stick. So, you run this all the time. Slow U-turn is also really, really nice. So you get this kind of EV spread where you drop your speed to as low as it can go, letting you support breakers like, say, Specs Florgus, Guts Heracross, even Life Orb Toxicroak if you want to go that route. Very, very nice and standard. Of course, we mentioned Gligar has spikes. So if you run alongside like a Copperajah or a Chansey, for example, you can put spikes here and run the same idea. But there's more! Order now, and you can get a daily dose of Toxic. Yeah, so Toxic is also still very useful in Gligar, especially when you combine it with a Hazard and Knockoff. Kind of just taking the route of, hey, I'm going to accrue all of the passive damage that I can. There is very little you will do to stop me. This kind of Gligar set really good at forcing those mirror matchups as well. Because, of course, since Gligar's got immunity, you don't care about Toxic. So, you result in these, like... Y'all remember the Gliscor trades in OU, where they just kind of stand in front of each other going for knockoff for 50 turns in a row? Yeah, kind of the same idea. At least in that exchange, one of the Gligars will eventually be KO'd. But... same idea here, where Gligar is often one of the best Gligar switch-ins because you don't care about Toxic, and if you get knocked, well, you can also threaten a knock. But there's more, of course. Acrobatics is also a very good move on Gligar. We don't see it as much anymore, and I think that's because fighting types have kind of fallen to the wayside in this current metagame. You don't see a ton of Croak, which you could EQ anyway, but Acro is technically stronger. Heracross is maybe the most common at this point, I want to argue. But even then, you don't necessarily need Acro to beat. And often Heracross will go for Terra Normal versus you anyway to actually, like, truly beat you down. At which point Earthquake becomes not as good because still boosted Acro is stronger, but still becomes a spammable option. I would say Acrobatics is also really nice for hitting something like Decidueye. You could have, you know, again, this could still be U-turn, mind you. I want to make sure we get the point across. This mon is incredibly versatile. You don't have to run Acro with Toxic. You don't have to run Spikes with that. You know, you can be Rocks up here too. But Acrobatics, very nice because Gligar are often taking knockoffs, right? Even with the drop-off in fighting types, you're often taking a knock from an opposing Gligar. Once you get your Acro, now you've got an even better move. So maybe you run EQ, Acro. Maybe we drop a Hazard entirely just to hammer home the point of versatility, right? Not Earth Power. No, I don't want Earth Power Gligar. That doesn't sound viable. Maybe we run a set like this, where it's just 4 attacks Gligar. And you're just saying, I want this for being a bulky Pokemon on my team. Well, at that point, yeah. I get the knock versus an opposing Gligar. Instead of having to spam knockoff, I'm spamming Acrobatics, baby. That's doing a lot more damage overall. It means that you can actually avoid the trade. Or not avoid the trade, but win the trade. Maybe you drop U-turn. Because you don't have to run U-turn all the time on Gligar. Maybe I'm Toxic here. Or maybe I'm like Taunt here. Something like that. Maybe I end up with this kind of set. I don't think I'd find a team that really wants that, but sure. Well, then I can go Impish and actually retain some speed. Maybe on a team I think I need to keep my Spikes up. So let's go back to this idea, right? I'm Spikes Gligar, U-turn knockoff. I think with Spikes you probably always want knockoff for what it's worth. I do like this idea of like always being together. It's technically not mandatory, but I do find it's rather easy to justify. It's just worth forcing on your teams. Maybe you can't find a ghost type you want to use. Maybe you're like, okay, I don't want Mismagius. Rotom normal, bad Pokemon. Decidueye, just not for me on this build. Well, you can go Terra Ghost. Obviously, Terra Water is incredible. Again, helps versus Bruxish, helps versus Rain, helps versus Snow teams if you face one. But you can go Ghost. This also helps a little bit versus Chansey, which is cool. Sometimes teams will struggle to have a Chansey switch in because, admittedly, Seismic Toss, T-Wave, I mean, those moves are kind of free to throw off. It's nice if your Gligar can turn into a Ghost type, then kind of just work as your Chansey abuser the whole game. This is definitely right, you can go as well. EVing. You don't have to go special defense EVs. I think it's worth it on Gligar, because with a Violite, you look at this boosted bulk, you're going up to like 468 defense from here. So like, although you can go full physical defense, it's not really needed. But what we've seen a little bit is maybe some people go like this. And then we can go sassy because we've got U-turn. Full specially defensive Gligar, where you see here, your defense is still going up to like 370. But now your special defense is up to 376. So you've got a much overall bulkier Pokemon, and you could still run Terra Water on either variant. Water is just generically good for covering your weaknesses. But you can run all the special bulk. It helps even more versus Salazzle. That's going to be the most common instance where this matters. While also giving you a nice buffer versus something like Hoopa. Now your Shadow Ball isn't doing as much to Gligar when it's got all the special bulk. Helps you trade maybe versus a Mismagius a little bit more effectively. So like Jolteon will struggle even more now to break through you, I believe. Ooh, let me remember. I think +1 with Terra is now a roll to 3-hit KO. I think it's still favorable for Jolt, but I don't believe it's guaranteed anymore. Of course, like with the EV spread I showed you with just 100 special defense, no boosting nature. That +1 calc is a guaranteed 3-hit KO before Stealth Rock. But I think when you go full special defense, that even becomes a roll. Like, it starts getting a little dicier. It's not like a bad roll for you, but a roll nonetheless. And now, what are we talking about when we talk about teammates? Well, we mentioned a couple, and we got Spike's Gligar in the builder right now, so Copperajah and Chansey. These are going to be the two most intuitive teammates you could think of to a Gligar. Because you get Stealth Rock out of either of these, and generally, they work nicely together because they're special tanks. Well, special tank here, special wall here. So Copperajah is able to take a lot of moves like, say, Florus Moonblast. Same with Chansey. While Gligar takes the CCs aimed at these two from foes like Tauros, foes like Toxicroak, foes like Heracross. Just very normal way to think about team building, right? Well, also, you pair one of these two, you got a nice little stealth truck. Well, what if I had an Avalo alongside them? And this really unlocks Gligar. Like, we'll go back to the, like, Chansey lug stuff real quick, because I think that works really nicely representative of the meta. You have now this incredible physical wall, this incredible special wall, especially with the Avalug point. Now Gligar is even more freed up to go, like, say, a specially defensive EV spread, or mixed. So we're going to go back to the 100 here. We could do this. When you got the Avalug, Gligar, of course, no longer needs all that physical bulk, because you got table, bro. Look at this thing's defense. I don't need to run a whole bunch of physical bulk on my Gligar, but I got Avalug as well, because you just have something else to shore up your switching to fighting types. Like, Tauros, I could Terra with my Avalug, for example. Now that becomes a great check. Same with any other fighting type. If I Terra Poison, I'm checking them. Another great partner, of course, too. Something like Florgus, where you get that wish support going. This could be on, for example, CM Florgus. This could be a dedicated wish support set. Just a very nice spawn in general. Also, of course, just like Chansey, very good special bulk. So you get a nice defensive core formed out of these two. Gligar doesn't cover as many weaknesses, I don't feel, to Florgus. But with how bad Florgus' physical bulk is, it's really nice to have Gligar anyway. Just because it offsets the threat of generic physical attack. So like something like... I mean, Toxicroak, I mean, you check with Gligar, great. That's really nice. But even something like a Copperajah, Gligar's bulky enough to take those heavy slams or those iron heads. So, works really nicely as a general partner as well. Because you don't have to be necessarily resisting the moves the other Pokemon's weak to. Just through sheer stats, Gligar can often take that task upon itself as well. Which is quite nice. And makes team building, again, very, very, very straightforward. So what are the teams we've seen Gligar on as well? Well, like I said, the common one is Chansey Lug. Because this idea of these three together often covers just about everything that you would need a check to in a metagame. These two already do a great blanket job of checking foes. And then, like, if you're going type chart-wise, the only thing that they share weakness-wise is fighting types. You throw a Gligar here, covers that. And maybe even a couple other physical wall breakers that Avalug would have to burn Terra to check. Gligar can check maybe wall, maybe just stifle a little bit on its own. So you can preserve your Terra, you're not forced to do it with Avalug. What are some other teams, though, of course, too? Well, we got this kind of angle here, where Gligar has Stealth Rock, and then you have a Colossal as your Spiker. Remember, Gligar does not have to be your team Spiker. We also went, of course, Terra Ghost Gligar on this build, because we wouldn't have a spin blocker otherwise. So Gligar, able to adapt its moveset to fit the needs of its team. I'm gonna be honest, I thought for a moment this team was missing EVs on the Gligar. Is this a wrong EV? Ignore it. I might have the wrong EVs. I think it's supposed to be 100 technically, and then 156 here. That's really funny. It doesn't matter at all, but yeah, there you go. Another angle, of course, here too, where Gligar is the Stealth Rocker instead, and you have Spike's Colossal with Rapid Spin as well, so you're able to fit both those on the same team. This team, a little bit different too, where you've got U-turn Gligar. Okay, maybe it was 120 the whole time, and I was feeding you lies. Yeah, so 120 special defense. This is what happens when you record partly tired. But you got that other team as well, where you got Tatsugiri for Rapid Spin instead of Colossal, so one that's going to struggle a little bit more to get in. And this is where, okay, this is a completely different angle, but this is still a Tatsugiri. Where was that team? Right here. So the idea with Tatsu plus Gligar, U-turn specifically, is this. Tatsugiri sucks at switching in. The Mon has very, very bad bulk. Having that slow U-turn from Gligar, though, is really, really good. You already have the natural synergy of spiking plus rapid spin. Like, that's just a known good thing. But now, you're able to U-turn pivot in Tatsu very, very easily, actually get it turns to spin. Maybe this is the best example of Tatsu, because this is a bulkier one anyway. I guess technically should be like that. Doesn't really matter. Like, if we're talking offensive Tatsugiri with Nasty Plot, right? The Mon struggles to find those in opportunities, but with a slow U-turn, it's actually not too bad. So that's another nice partnering that you can do. And then, of course, you got this team as well, where once again, you got Rock's Gligar, but with a different spiker. This time it's Keys. That's going to be it for this Gligar showcase, guys. I hope you all enjoyed this. Gligar, very, very dominant Pokemon. We'll see how well it retains through the tier shifts we got this month. As of recording this, I have no idea what we got. But Pokemon like Mudsdale were projected to drop. Does Gligar beat out Mudsdale for viability? I'm thinking yes. Shockingly enough, I think Gligar should be better than Muds, but we'll see. I mean, you got a Mon and Mudsdale that's not reliant on an item for its bulk, so maybe that changes the dynamic a little bit. But until next time, guys, I hope you're having a great day. And I will see you in the next video where we will be covering tier shifts. Peace.